to the Hedberg Public Library.
It's so nice to be with you, Jamie.
It's wonderful to have you here today. And welcome to those of you who are joining us for our premiere video. We are here watching live with you right now, so please feel free to say hello to Ann in the comments so she knows that you're here celebrating this wonderful book release with us today. As you know, we're here celebrating her latest book, Ensnared in the Wolf's Lair, inside the 1944 plot to kill Hitler and the ghost children of his revenge. So I would like to take a moment, Ann, to introduce you properly before giving you the floor for your presentation, if that's okay with you.
Please go ahead.
All right. Ann Bausum has a talent for connecting readers with history in a way that connects the past to present events. Ensnared in the Wolf's Lair is Ann's 16th nonfiction book for readers. Ann's body of work was recognized in 2017 by the Children's Book Guild of Washington, D.C. Ann, thank you so much for taking time out of your extremely busy schedule to speak with the readers at Hedberg Public Library, to share a little insight into your work, and then afterwards to hopefully answer a few questions that I know readers would have asked if they were here live with you for this celebration. So again, thank you very much. And with no further ado, I'm going to go ahead and give you the floor so that you can share some more information and some insight into your process and this wonderful new book.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you to all the people who've joined us to learn a little bit more about Ensnared in the Wolf's Lair. I know we're going to be talking further after this presentation, so I'm just going to give you a brief look at some of the background behind this book, how it came to be, and some of the places that I visited and the people that I met while I was doing my own time traveling through the Wolf's Lair. So I don't always know when a book began, but this one began on February 3rd, 2014, when I got an email from one of the wonderful editors at National Geographic. She wrote to me, she said, I wanted to reach out to you because I read an article a while ago that I thought would make a really great book. And Jennifer is very keen to do it. We discussed who we would want to write it. Of course, you would be our first choice, but I'm not sure how much you have on your plate these days. Talk to you soon, Becky. So Becky and I talked, and it turned out that her idea had to do with a World War II history. And I said, Becky, I don't know a lot about World War II. I haven't been to Germany in decades. And she said, well, I think you should go to Europe, look around, maybe you'll find something. So that's what I did. I took my son with me because he has language skills that far eclipse mine when it comes to speaking German. And in 2015, we were following the trail of history across Germany and beyond. And we visited many, many sites related to World War II and the rise of Nazi power, both in Germany and beyond, including to this site, the Wolfschanze or Wolf's Lair, which is in modern day Poland. And so we traveled there. It was winter in January of 2015. We went there because this was one of Hitler's favorite residences during World War II. It was on the Eastern Front. It was a military command post full of fortified bunkers. And it was the place where history was made July 20, 1944, when an attempt was made on Hitler's life. And so we traveled to the Wolf's Lair to see this place, including the site where that attack occurred. And this is the remains of it and a memorial there. But there's so much more on this property. And we hired a guide and began to walk the grounds and see the remains of this multi-building, dozens of buildings, including these giant above-ground concrete bunkers that have endured decades after they were abandoned in the fall of 1944. And so I just thought I would share some pictures. We've been so cooped up. Many people have not been able to make this trip. It's still a long journey in a tranquil, quiet part of Poland. And I thought you would enjoy just stepping beyond your living rooms and getting a brief glimpse of the Wolfschanze, the Wolf's Lair. And just, I'll point out just some details like this green fuzzy stuff on this brick structure. If you look closely, it's actually a camouflage that's been applied. One minute you're walking these wooded paths, and the next minute you come across this just colossus, like a Mayan ruin. And it started snowing while we were there. The whole experience was ghostly and chilling, and yet it was peaceful and beautiful. And I kept those contradictions in my mind as I continued to think about the paths leading into the Wolfschanze from Berlin and the history that had taken place there. And by 2018, I knew the angle that I wanted to explore related to the history of World War II and the Wolfschanze. And I decided I needed to go back to Germany because I wanted to learn about the ghost children. And we'll talk a little bit more about them in a bit, but I thought I would just introduce them briefly as they are today. These children were the children of the conspirators who were part of that coup, and they and all of their relatives, or most of their relatives, were caught up in a purge of revenge that followed the failed conspiracy. And so Klaus von Stauffenberg, the military officer who planted those explosives at the Wolf's Lair, he had many children, including Berthold von Stauffenberg, his oldest at age 10 at that time, who was kind enough to meet with me and with Sam when we returned to Germany in 2018. Paul von Hase, one of the conspirators, had, as you can see, a large family, including Friedrich Wilhelm von Hase, otherwise known as Frivi, who was age 7 at the time and met with me when I returned to Germany. I also talked to other people with ties to this history, including Christa von Hoffaker, who was age 12 at the time and kept a diary of her experiences, and Maria Gisela von Hase, who was age 20 and was older than the ghost children, but nonetheless part of that campaign of persecution that followed the failed attempt to kill Hitler and overthrow the regime in 1944. And so during this return trip, we revisited some sites we'd seen before, including the Bendler Block in Berlin, which is where the military coup was headquartered. This site has become a remarkable museum now to the German resistance, including this conspiracy. It's the site where von Stauffenberg and others were murdered by firing squad after the uprising failed. And so I have found in all of my writing that when I can visit the places where history happened, I'm better able to put myself back in time to those moments and bring them alive for my readers. Another place we visited was Potency Prison, where so many of the conspirators and thousands of other people were murdered after show trials during the Nazi regime. And it's very much a living memorial with flowers arriving on a regular basis to commemorate the lives lost. Then we traveled to Bad Sachse, which is a community, it's a recreational community. It was during World War II also. And on the outside of town at that time was this complex of charming houses. You can't really call them cabins, but it reminds me a bit of a Wisconsin summer camp. And it had been built as a retreat for children who wanted a break from living in the cities, but it had been turned into a Nazi complex during the war. And after the failed conspiracy, it became the place where the youngest children of the conspirators were brought against their will and held for indefinite periods of time as part of this family revenge that followed the failed coup. And so we went to the Borntal, which still exists. It's underutilized. Most of the houses sit vacant, and we were able to go through them, or walk around them, and even go inside of them. And again, put our feet in the places where the history had taken place, and climb the stairs, see the architectural details, and it was with cupboards open and doors ajar. It was almost as if the people had just exited from the pages of history before we got there. Sam is an intrepid photographer, and I turned around and there he is perched on top of a pile of logs, and I'm scolding him. And yet on the other hand, the pictures that he took from that perch made his efforts worthwhile, and certainly our travels proved worthwhile when it came time to come home, continue to do the research, comb through the transcripts of interviews that I had conducted, and begin to pull together the threads that became Ensnared in the Wolf's Lair. And so I think I'll leave it there. I have some pictures I may share in a little bit, but that sets up the book and gives you an introduction to this project.
Ann, thank you for that presentation. It was really interesting to be able to kind of follow you along with the journey and see a little bit of the research that it took to get to this completed book. And I want to show everyone my copy of Ensnared in the Wolf's Lair. You'll notice I have little Post-it notes all over my copy, and horror of horrors, I've written all over the inside as well. But I know that you brought a few of the graphics to show our listeners the design of the book a little bit, as well as some of the photo research that you did, some of the wonderful raised quotes, and also the really valuable back matter. So if you are able to share that a little bit today, I think it will really help people understand the importance of the design of the book as well as the content.
Sure. Let's do that. Let's take a peek inside Ensnared in the Wolf's Lair, and I'll start with the very first page, which is the half title, a wordless half title that helps to set the tone for the book. It's not just serious in tone. It's a book that makes you pause and start to think.
Yeah, that image is very powerful.
Yeah. And this was art that the publisher commissioned, just like the art on the jacket, which I really appreciated. And I've never actually had that done before for a book. So this is a first for me, but very effective.
It really is. And I know we're going to talk more about the ghost children because I'm going to ask you a question about it later, but what a powerful image.
It creates that question of who are these kids and what's their story. So the National Geographic's a master at using mixing photos and text. That's their signature accomplishment or just trademark. And the designer came back with this interpretation of the opening quote that I had given her for the book, and several photos to choose from. And I just thought it sets up the challenge that underlies this whole conspiracy, where Klaus Schenk-Graf von Stauffenberg says at one point to his wife ahead of the coup, "It is now time for something to be done. But he who has the courage to do something must do so in the knowledge that he will go down in German history as a traitor. If he does not do it, however, then he will be a traitor to his own conscience." And that was the conundrum for these people, many of whom were in the military and many of whom had literally sworn an oath of allegiance to Adolf Hitler.
Right. And I don't think that's something that we focus very much on in history, is understanding the resistance within Hitler's own people. So that's a very good quote to start with.
Yeah, so here's the introduction for the book. We turn the page and we get to the introduction, which helps to remind readers that, of course, of the famous diarist of World War II, Anne Frank, who was aware of this coup attempt at the Wolfschanze. And so the opening lines are from her own diary. "I'm finally getting optimistic," Anne Frank wrote in her diary on July 21, 1944. "Now, at last, things are going well. They really are." And this is the day after the failed coup, and the thought that there could be a revolt brewing within the German army gave her a great deal of hope. And yet at the same time, there was another girl who was beginning a diary, Christa von Hoffaker, who I spoke about earlier, And this introduction helps to make that segue from one very well-known diary to one diary that's not well known at all beyond Germany, and the experiences that a different set of families was having, not caught up in the ultimate horror of the Holocaust, but nonetheless in the grasp of the tyranny of Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, it's really crushing to read those words from Anne Frank, knowing how it turns out in the short term and what happens to Anne Frank and her family. Also interesting that this is where your story starts, really,
Yeah.
with Krista's journey.
Yeah. I mean, within weeks, she had this was one of her last diary entries for Anne Frank. So, as optimistic as she felt at that time, things got very grim very fast.
I'm glad that you're showing this kind of spread where you have that kind of iconic looking photo that we think about sometimes when we think about Hitler, but also the way that the raised quotes are in the book. This one I have marked in my book as well.
Yeah, it's I really built the whole first chapter around this quote, and so I'll read it to you. It's by a German professor, Victor Klemperer, who was a linguist and was extremely attentive to the language that was being used and developed by the Third Reich and how just insidiously effective it was. And he wrote, "Words can be like tiny doses of arsenic. They are swallowed unnoticed, appear to have no effect, and then after a little time, the toxic reaction sets in after all." And that was just such a powerful thought to me, that you could use this rhetoric to essentially poison a population and until they become compliant and believe what you have said. And so the book, again, building on that quote, the opening paragraph is, "Word by word, dose by dose, his language charmed the people until there could be no other leader, no other Führer." And then this chapter, it sets up how Hitler rose to power.
So you do such a nice job in the body of the book, helping us understand, like I said, where we're entering the story. But also you have a timeline at the back of the book, as well as index helping us know who the people are in the book. Do you have any graphic to show everyone those two things?
Yeah, let me, I'll share a few spreads that just help to show the integration of photos and text, which again is that just a skill that the publisher brings to any project that I've done with them, and helps us again to humanize and remember these families and personalize this story so that we can feel a kinship with the individuals who are going through it. And I love how we're able to even work in these documents. You saw one earlier. Here's a page from Krista's diary, in an effort to try to again bring you into the moment, so that I can't take all of you to Germany, but I can, as close as possible, try to help transport you back in time travel back to these days. So yeah, here's a look at that timeline you were talking about.
This was really helpful for me. I was kind of going back and forth, and after reading it, just kind of letting it sink in, because I was not familiar with so much of this part of this history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seemed important to have that reference there. Again, this is a book primarily targeted to children who are in middle school, high school. It's bound to be popular with adults too, just because it's such an undertold story in the United States. But that timeline is there for everybody, because I mean, I love timelines in books. It's a real help.
And then the other thing here, the key that helps us separate the families and the children, this was extremely helpful as well.
Yeah, we've got, for an American reading audience that may not have, I mean, in addition to the last names being somewhat unusual in this country, even the first names, they're not necessarily Christian names that we're used to seeing with people. And so it was a way to make sure that readers didn't get lost. I tried to make it as easy as possible to again appreciate not just who these people were, but to look at a specific family and size up the impact that this revenge took on each family
And then,
at least on paper.
Equally helpful is your resource guide that's not only in the book here that I think that teachers and students will like to go back to and do further research, but you connect that to your author webpage, and readers can go right there and find the direct links taking them to some of these wonderful resources.
Yeah, exactly. And that's my website is just my name, annbausum.com. And there's a page for every book, and you'll find all of these links under the related links tab for Ensnared in the Wolf's Lair. Thanks for mentioning that.
Oh, I'm glad that you put that image of the ghost children back up. That's my first question that I know that the audience would have had for you. Can you tell us, how did the children actually come to be known as the ghost children?
So this is a name they didn't even know they had at the time. They were, not all of the children were kept at the property the same length of time. Some were released after a few weeks. Others were still there when Allied forces liberated that part of Germany in mid-April of 1945. But in the months prior to that liberation, some of the houses on the site had been inhabited by German military officers and scientists who were working nearby. And they observed the kids observed them. There was no actual interaction between them, but the officers noticed that when the children walked around the property, they didn't talk. They communicated with a sign language. And that's because among the rules imposed on the kids while they were being held at the Borntal is that they could not speak to one another when they were outside. So they had developed this unique sign language as a way to continue communicating. And to these outside observers, there was the assumption that these were perhaps children who had some sort of communication disability. Maybe they were deaf. And the figures who were silently walking this landscape kind of took on the impression of ghosts. They had a ghostly look to them. And so the German word is Geisterkinder. That was actually the name of a key book about this history published in Germany. And it was only many years later that Christa von Hofecker was living in California and was at a dinner party with other people that included some former Germans. And this story came up enough so that one of the guests there was able to connect her to that site and say, "Oh my gosh, Christa, you were one of the ghost children." And he had been one of the scientists who was at that property and had seen these kids and who remembered that was the term that had been developed for them. And that was such a chilling phrase for them, and so poignant, because it not only captured them at the time, but also speaks to the kinds of trauma that they lived with, the ghost-like existence they had, and the shadows that followed them afterwards. So it's no wonder it became part of that title, and that I paid homage to the term in my own subtitle.
Absolutely. The next question that I have for you would be, what would you hope that readers take away from reading this book?
I think it's a reminder that there was a level of, as much as we think we know about the German leadership during World War II, there was a level of evil, a level of cruelty, a level of just tireless persecution that was going on, and that the regime was capable of, and that one should not underestimate the power of a regime to terrorize a population, and that terror can take many forms, including something as, seemingly benevolent as being confined at a very scenic property but yet every day, even though you're being fed food, nobody's mistreating you physically, you have this mental anguish of not knowing if you're ever going to leave or when you will leave, not knowing if you'll ever see your parents again, and being lied to repeatedly by the staff in ways that continue to mislead you. I think that's just this idea that terror can take many forms, and it's no less traumatic. Um, Even if it seems to be in a tranquil setting.
Well, it definitely gave me chills as I read it, and I will be thinking about this for many, many years. And various stories that we're hearing from the news will echo back to this book for me. So while you were researching this book, was there anything that you found surprising? Did you learn anything you didn't think you were going to learn while writing this book or researching it?
Like every page.
Yeah, as I was asking that, it kind of seemed like that, but
Yes, so absolutely. The book was, it was such a learning experience. But I think, one of the things that I enjoyed the most, I think the thing, perhaps let's say this, the thing that surprised me the most was that a book that went to such a dark place, which was actually a reason I resisted. I said, do I really want to write about World War II? I'm not sure I can go there. That's just such a dark place. But I found myself pulled into it. And then I got such care and comfort from the interactions I had with these eyewitnesses to history. I didn't just learn their stories, I made friends, and they helped get me through. And so did their doppelgangers, these little kids that they had been once upon a time. I knew them as adults, and yet as I was writing about them, I could just hear their child voices. And I really they pulled me through this book, that experience of being, for not only writing for children, but writing with children and about children. It was a true privilege to not only be entrusted with their childhood memories, but also to come to know and respect them as octogenarians today.
so yeah, that is amazing, and that's a wonderful part of being a writer and being able to conduct the kind of interviews and research that you are able to do. I don't really want to switch gears entirely here, but with a mind to time and our viewers, I did want to switch gears just a little bit. You kind of touched on it a little bit in your answer. You went to a rather dark place while researching this, and I know that the researching of this book, it took years of your life. As you're writing and as you're dealing with some of the topics that you tend to deal with, what do you read for fun and relaxation? How do you separate yourself? Do you want to separate yourself from that place that you need to be in while you are balancing important history and tone? But then you have your own life too, where you need to be out of that. So what do you read when you're not researching?
Well, I'll admit a little, a little indulgent secret about that. But I do actually want to step back for one moment. Push time back. We're time traveling today, after all, and just give an added shout out to not only Krista in California, who the diarist, who has been so helpful, but also Freevey, the professor in Germany, whose work, Hitler's Russia, was which it translates as Hitler's Revenge, was such an important compilation of eyewitness accounts. And Freevey and I have corresponded a lot to this day. And so I really need to pay homage to both of them for their writings, and also to a cousin of mine who lives in Germany and is a translator and of English to German, but very kindly helped translate some of the professor's book and also my own, or the other book, the Geisterkinder book that I had mentioned, helped me understand material in those that I just wasn't able to access. So that's that's one last little Wolf's Lair memory I would share. And I will say that when I am in the midst of one of these books, I make a bargain with the book that says, you know, I'm basically yours. I will stick with this topic in my mind throughout the day, and I'll even dream about them at night. But I do pause to just, rather than adding competing stories to it, go back and rewatch movies, go back and reread favorite books. Because when I show up for work the next day, I want to be right there in 1944, 1945. And that may sound kind of like war service or something. It's really not. It's just that I get to reread Jane Austen an awful lot. And I love Jane Austen, so that's a pleasure. And so, you know, or rewatch favorite movies, or sometimes I'll go down a path where I'm watching films that are all set during this period. And I watched a lot of German language television, fortunately with subtitles, or World War II documentaries and so forth. And that's okay. Then I'll take a break between each book and read that, start to attack that pile of novels that is, you know,
Never ending. Yes,
Yeah.
the never ending pile of novels. No, that's really interesting because I know that many times fiction writers also will, if they're writing especially a period piece, watch movies from that time or listen to music from that time to really help get into the head and the tone, so that when you do go back to the actual writing, you've kind of been there subconsciously the whole time.
Right.
So that's really interesting. And I have, you can't see it because I put your books up behind me, but I have a Jane Austen book club book that I've been reading too. That's one of my favorite things to dip into when I need a little bit of a break. So that's wonderful to hear. Also, again, with time in our mind, and I'm sorry for having to rush through some of the things that I could spend another hour talking to you about this wonderful book. But I am very interested also in what is next for Ann Bausum. What are you going to teach me next? Where am I going with you?
Well, that's a good place to point out that you are not just my librarian and my friend, but also a critique partner. And so you see a lot of my early writing, just like I see your early writing, since we're both also authors. And so the next project I'll be bringing to you and our other critique partners will be a very American story, but it's almost as if you know, there's a through line with most of the books that I've done. So many of them deal with social justice history, the power of propaganda, and how that impacts the turn of events. And so I'm going to be looking at the American history from the post-Civil War era and this mythology that sprang up to kind of comfort people who had were disappointed by their defeat in the South, a mythology that's often called the lost cause mythology, and which has led to a distorted understanding of the Civil War, of the events that led to the Civil War, and has kind of corrupted our ability to face difficult parts of our own national narrative. And so that'll be another deep dive, but it's history that particularly resonates with me because as someone who grew up in the South and who was essentially indoctrinated in some of this misinformation, I think it's important to join this national reckoning that we're having right now with conversations about information, factual credibility, and our past. And so that'll be my contribution.
That will be amazing. And I can't wait to read not only the finished product, but also, like you said, I am so fortunate that I do get to watch some of these stories evolve. And listening to you talk about that next, it makes perfect sense to me that this is the next story that you would tell, because you touch on that even in Wolf's Lair, how in the late 60s, the youth in Germany, they wanted to know the honest truth of their history. And it was history that had been buried. So here you go, helping uncover some of that for American readers, but also now turning to our own history and looking at areas where we need to perhaps look back again and understand some of our own truths. So thank you, Ann Bausum, for continuing to bring us on these journeys and helping us look at history in ways that maybe we hadn't had the opportunity to look at it before. So thank you again. My final question for you, like I said, I could talk to you for another hour, but my final question is simply, if a reader would like to get an autographed copy of Ensnared in the Wolf's Lair, I know that you have been in contact with one of our local bookstores. Could you tell our listeners how they could have one of these books shipped to them?
Sure. And I think you're going to pop up some information at the end of this
absolutely
program.
will share that, yes.
So people don't need to panic and rush to write it down immediately. But there is a bookstore in our area, Book World, and Rini has agreed that she will be happy to ship signed copies to people of this book or other books that I've written if they're interested. That information's on my website too. You can go there and find out more details. But Rini will get in touch with me if she gets an order. I can stop in periodically and sign books. Don't expect them overnight, but you'll get them, and it'll be an honor to personalize a copy for anybody who's interested.
And I encourage everyone who's interested in learning more about this history, go ahead and either purchase your own copy, or as always, books are available through the Hedberg Public Library. You can call down for a curbside pickup or go ahead online and reserve your copy today and read Ann's latest book, Ensnared in the Wolf's Lair. Ann, thank you so much for sharing insight into your journey with us today. It's always lovely for me to be able to share you with a greater audience. So thank you.
You make it so easy, Jamie. Thank you very, very much. This has been an honor, and greetings to everybody. I'll see you on the other side of the pandemic. Stay safe out there.
We'll just take a minute or two while I put that information up, and go ahead and say hello again to Ann in the live commenting. We really are here. We really are watching with you, and we thank you for joining us today for this discussion. Thanks, Ann.
Bye-bye. Thank you.